Hey, so this is going to be a two-part series. I usually only do videos nowadays when I receive a donation, but in this case, I was so excited about this trick that I just wanted to share it with the community. So I want to talk about modular synthesis for a second. With modular synthesis, you have three types of modules. You have your sources, your modifiers, and your controllers. Sources are things like oscillators and noise. A source constitutes any module that makes a sound that would be considered a source. And then you have your modifiers, which are things like wave shapers and filters. Modifiers don't make sounds themselves, they only modify existing sounds. And then you have your controllers, which are things like LFO, envelopes, or the CV output of a keyboard. Those don't make sounds, they don't modify sounds, but they control other parameters. So they might control, the oscillator frequency, or they might control the filter cutoff frequency. They might control your amplitude in the case of an amp EG. Um, and the thing about modular synthesis is that you don't have to use a module uh, for what it's designed for. You can kind of use it in a multi-purpose way. I think the most obvious example would be using a filter as a kind of oscillator by boosting the resonance. And in this video, I'm going to do that. And then in the next, I'm going to use a controller as a source. Um, so yeah, let's use a modifier as a source. Let's use a filter as an oscillator. I'm going to grab the MS-20, and we have this initialized MS-20. It's that stab sound. I'm going to take down both oscillators actually. And you know what? I'm just going to, instead of just initializing it, I'm going to set up all the parameters the way that I want them. So I'm going to take oscillator 1 and turn it into a triangle. I'm going to take off analog tuning. I'm going to open up the low pass filter, take off the resonance, take off envelope generator two's effect on that low pass filter. I'm going to disable the external modulation. I guess I don't have to. I could leave it for the patch, but it's okay. And then I'm going to initialize this envelope by taking off the release, turning up the sustain, turning up the decay time, actually. Decay will still have an effect on the MS-20 even if the sustain level is all the way up. It's just the way this envelope works. I go into it in detail in the MS-20 series, so you can just watch that video there. And then in the patch panel, I'm going to grab VCO1 and patch it into this mixer. I'm going to take the high pass filter and patch it into this mixer. I'm going to take that output and patch it into the input of the amp. So I want to turn the high pass filter into an oscillator. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to tune it against VCO1. So if I were to not patch VCO1 into this mixer and then patch them both into the output, I would only be able to hear VCO1 as it's going through the high pass filter. And you can't really do it that way because when the resonance is boosted all the way up, it destroys the tonality of any sound that's going into it. So in this way, we have them both routed. And remember, this is all the way down, so the high pass filter is actually not receiving a signal anyway. So we know that it's only making noise because of its own feedback. So let's tune it. You can tell when you're close to the frequency that you want because the beating will start to stop, just like if you're tuning a guitar against another string or something like that. So 4.08 seems to be the closest that I can get to a C4, which is what, 261 hertz. And if I just have a set like this, any note that I play will actually just play a C4 if I disconnect VCO2. So if we're only listening to the filter, it's only that one note, that C4. The reason why I wanted to tune it to C4 is because that's the note that causes no modulation when you're using key tracking, because I do want to make this an oscillator source. I want it to be key tracked. So I'm going to grab note number and use that as an alternate modulation source. And I'm going to want to patch VCO1 back into this mixer because I want to hear them both again, but this time I'm going to play a C5 because now I get to turn up this. Oh, you know what? Well, I can explain that later. Okay, so now let me tune this up. .71 seems to be the where the least amount of beating is happening. Cool, so now I can go ahead and unplug VCO1. So now when I play, and of course since this is the MS-20X, we get polyphony as well. It's worth saying that usually if you weren't using a Kronos, you could take the keyboard CV out and patch that into the cutoff frequency of the high pass filter, but unfortunately it's not very accurate. It only really would key track the filter for like 1 octave range. It's not that useful. It's much better to use the note number. And let me explain something about the note number AMS source. It's just like the key tracks, the two key track sources that you have in the Kronos. The only difference between note number as an AMS source is that you can't adjust it like you could adjust the key tracks. It acts as if it always has the basic slope. And then the reason why I had to tune it to C4 is because C4 causes no modulation, and then you get negative modulation going down the keyboard and positive modulation going up the keyboard. So yeah, so we end up with this this new oscillator. We're using this modifier as the source, and you can see that it's not a perfect sine wave. We do have some odd harmonics here. In fact, if I play a G, which is pretty close to 100 hertz, we can see that our first harmonic is about 300 hertz, and then the harmonic beyond that is close to 500, so on and so forth. So it's only odd harmonic multiples of the fundamental, and again, you can kind of see that the waveform itself is a bit square. So yeah, so I actually don't want that. I want to try to get rid of that. One thing that I could do is I can kind of turn down the peak, and that will get rid of some of those upper harmonics. But the sacrifice, the cost of that, is that it would take a bit of time for us to hear our new source, because it would take a bit for this amount of resonance to cause self-oscillation to feed back. So I can hit a key and it now fades in. Some physical modeling engines actually use that to as a kind of as a parameter. The STR1 does, at least. You can set kind of the attack of the comb filter, or the amount of feedback of the comb filter. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave that all the way up. And then the patch panel, I'm going to disconnect everything, because instead of having the high pass filter go to the output on its own, I'm just going to use the regular signal path of the high pass filter going into the low pass filter, which now I'll use to dip those frequencies, those higher harmonics. And the nice thing about this is that I can just tune it the exact same way as the way that I have the high pass filter. So I can put it on 4.08, grab note number, patch that in there, put it on 4.71. Oops, do that again, 4.71. And now the low pass filter is key tracked as well. So no matter which note that I hit, it'll have the same harmonic structure instead of, having this not key tracked. If I were to boost this all the way up, we would get all those harmonics back. Ironically, the peak almost acts like a low pass filter now. But I just want to leave it down because I only want it to work as a low pass filter that removes harmonics from my new dirty sine wave. And that's it for this video. We used a modifier to create a source. In the next video, we're going to use a controller, an LFO, as a source, as a kind of oscillator, and we will also tune it chromatically. But by doing so, we're going to run into all sorts of things. So yeah, I'll catch you on that one. Bye.